Several years ago, I read a bunch of Neil Gaiman's novels, including Coraline, Neverwhere, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, American Gods, Stardust, and Anansi Boys. I never finished Anansi Boys, and I'll get to why, but for several years, I wanted to discuss it because of how weird I found certain parts of it. I've also wanted to discuss the craftsmanship that goes into luring a reader back through grim and disturbing elements. I could see the lure, but I guess it was just never enough to lure me, which is too bad because I have a feeling I would have enjoyed the book if I'd read it back then. There's been a lot of discussion lately about whether it's productive to examine a work of art to discover the problems with an author. The most prominent recent example of this is J.K. Rowling, whose neoliberal politics inform the world of Harry Potter and whose transphobic politics are actively ruining the lives of millions of trans people. However, this kind of analysis is neither unique to J.K. Rowling or particularly productive towards finding which authors are secretly bad people. While authors obviously bring a lot of themselves into their writing, like Anne Rice having a Catholic episode throughout the Vampire Chronicles, they're also, if they're writing fiction, good at lying. Fiction is a space for exploring the kinds of people you are and the kinds of people you aren't. If a good person can write a really convincing villainous patriarch, or a tyrant, or a petulant crybaby, or someone who neglects their friends, then surely an abuser can write convincing protectors, kind and generous neighbors, politicians and professors who understand the systems that need to change, etc. If a writer is a good writer, they can do all of this. I did a video several months ago on how to use paratext, including the facts of an author's life, to highlight themes and ideas in a text and inform an analysis of that text. Knowing where an author is coming from can sometimes impart new emphasis on previously understated themes and ideas. Because I've already done so much analysis on this body of work, and on Anansi Boys in particular, I'd like to take this moment to illustrate how knowledge of an author's life and crimes can change that analysis. My original video that I would have made had Neil Gaiman's alleged sexual assaults and further misconducts not been found out would have gone something like: the patterns of behavior between male characters and their female love interests in Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere, American Gods, and Stardust are distasteful enough to me that when I began to read Anansi Boys and it became apparent to me that we were doing the same thing yet again, it was enough to make me close the book in displeasure and not want to continue to read. Despite my problems with the pattern of behavior between Neil Gaiman's male protagonists and their love interests, there is an element of hope nestled in Anansi Boys that may have been enough to lure another reader to finish, but it wasn't enough for me. This video describes why. These 4 books all follow a very similar romantic arc. In Stardust, Tristan starts the book obsessed with Victoria, who uses him when it's convenient for her and doesn't give him the time of day when it isn't. He goes on a journey to impress her. The deal is, when he brings her home the star, she will give him what he requests. He goes out, meets the star, who's a humanoid woman, and grows as a person, falls in love with this much more interesting woman who helps him figure out who he's meant to be all along. He comes home and sees the woman he used to be obsessed with and wonders how he could have been so crazy about someone who now seems so wrong for him. A decent story, no? Lots of people fixate on the wrong people when we're young, either liking someone for shallow reasons or not considering our own needs and wants when picking someone to love. Then, as we see more of the world, we figure out what we want from life and figure out with whom we want to share it. In American Gods, Shadow starts off about to be released from prison when he finds out that his wife and his best friend were both killed in a car crash because they'd been having an affair with one another. At first, Shadow feels like his life is over, but as he gets swept up in the world of gods, he learns to find new meaning in his own life and death. In the end, he's able to help his late wife, who had become reanimated through the power of the leprechaun's lucky coin, pass on. The story is a little different since there's no fantastical woman on the other side of this growth, but the themes of outgrowing and moving past your old woman is still there. In Neverwhere, Richard is engaged to someone who is profoundly wrong with him. Truly, we are hit over the head with just how wrong for him she is. They meet at an art gallery, so even though Richard doesn't like going to them that much, she keeps dragging him to them. He also doesn't seem very invested in her. For example, she asks him to make a dinner reservation and he forgot because it wasn't that important to him. The last straw for him was finding a freezing girl on the sidewalk on their way to dinner and deciding to try and save her rather than make their dinner reservation with her boss. Basically, they just have different priorities and they're not right for each other. Then he goes on a magical adventure and finds out there are better matches for him and she's not it, and he'd rather live a magical life in shadowy London below than a mundane life with her. You're starting to see the pattern, yes? In the Anansi Boys, Fat Charlie has a fiancée, Rosie, and they seem to love each other genuinely, but there's one big problem with her. She's waiting for marriage, and he'd prefer it if she'd put out. Well, the wedding's around the corner, right? Well, that's before the brother Spider comes to town. Spider has god powers that he uses to take Fat Charlie's place and identity. It starts by him going to work for Fat Charlie so that Fat Charlie could get some business done, but it extends to taking Rosie out on dates and, yes, sleeping with her. She was drawn in because he smelled good, and even though the narrative had established that she did not want to sleep with anyone before she was married to him, magic was used to change her mind. That's sexual assault, and it was hard to tell based on the way the story was written if Gaiman understood that this was assault. I found this both repetitive and distasteful, and this was when I put the story down. I didn't like the way real-world women are portrayed as boring distractions from men reaching their true magical potential. I didn't like how the only worthy women are stars and magic users and tools for male character development. It started feeling tiring and insulting, and I put the book down and haven't read any Neil Gaiman since. I almost did once or twice because of how Neil Gaiman set up his plot with Anansi the father being the kind of person who could be defeated and had been defeated many times, and thereby planting the seed that Spider the son could be bested. Ultimately, though, I just didn't trust Gaiman to wrap up things in a way that would feel satisfying. I knew that he would resolve things between Charlie and Spider, but I also had the feeling that his fiancée would not be treated with the respect she deserved. She'd been assaulted by someone pretending to be her fiancé. She had been coerced through magic to sleep with him against her will. But based on Gaiman's other books, I just had a feeling that she would be written to be yet another boring earthly woman that needed to be cast aside because she stunted the male protagonist's growth. I looked it up and it's so much worse. Rosie marries Spider. Yeah, I'm glad I didn't finish this. My instincts were correct and my blood is boiling. At the same time, I figured I had just outgrown what Neil Gaiman had to say. He's certainly not the only author to fixate on an idea or a character pattern and to write it into a plurality of his works. It happens with a lot of authors who've written more books than they have stories to tell. On its face, it's not even a bad story. Lots of people overcome stupid love and find lasting love later, including Neil Gaiman, who's been married more than once. It was the way he framed these women, though, that stuck out to me as not just boring, but outright objectionable. You're either boring and wrong, or a magical girl who helps a man reach his potential. That's just not enough for me as a reader. That's where I would have left things had I never learned everything that's come out over the past year. Now, when my thoughts feel more relevant than ever, I'm publishing them into a discourse about how such analyses are unproductive to a broader conversation about Neil Gaiman's alleged crimes. It's worth commenting then that none of what I've noticed in his work could have been used to identify that Neil Gaiman was and is allegedly a sexual predator. That's not how analysis works. You can use an author's life to inform your reading of the text and not the other way around. It's also a matter of suggesting that his work was bad all along. I enjoyed many of his stories and noticed one weird thing that made me not want to continue. That's not the same thing. Rather, when I heard the accusations made against Gaiman, I thought, yeah, that makes a certain amount of sense, and got to feel clever for having previously noticed the way that he treated women in his stories. And then I felt sad. If there was something to learn from his stories, it was that everyone, not just clueless young men, deserves a support network that can help them reach their full potential. Women deserve so much more than to be a part of someone else's story to the exclusion of their own development. By coincidence or design, the same lesson can be gleaned from the real-life allegations against Neil Gaiman. Each of these women deserves to live a fulfilling life free from use and abuse, and I hope that with support networks of their own and distance from those who hurt them, they can achieve this for themselves.